let me assure you, a responsible member of the international community committed to its obligations to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Russia is taking every possible measure to prevent Ukraine from getting nuclear weapons and respective technologies.
The nuclear saber rattling is one of many that Russia has openly indulged in. Just days into the Ukraine invasion, Vladimir Putin had put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert as a chilling warning to NATO and the West.
Dear colleagues, as you can see, not only Western countries take unfriendly measures against our country. In the economic dimension, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well. But the top officials of leading NATO countries allow themselves to make aggressive statements with regard to our country. That is why I ordered Defense Minister and Chief of General Staff to put Russian Army deterrence forces on high alert.
It has now emerged that Russia had even dispatched its nuclear ballistic missile submarines into the North Atlantic as the war raged in Ukraine. After their deterrent patrol, the submarines were quietly pulled back by the Kremlin. The West fears that Russia, suffering massive reverses in Ukraine's war theatre, could resort to using tactical nuclear weapons, which are of a small yield but can devastate an entire city. In a bid to escalate the war and force Ukraine to agree to its terms on the negotiations table.
Allies agreed to supply equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats. This could include detection equipment, protection and medical support, as well as training for decontamination and crisis management. We are also enhancing allies' preparedness and readiness for chemical and biological and nuclear threats.
A calculated nuclear gambit or plain brinkmanship to turn the tide in a war that has simply not gone Russia's way as expected. Whatever it may be, the Ukraine war triggering nuclear moves comes as a massive alarm bell for the entire world. Most analysts believe that Russia's saber rattling with nuclear weapons is precisely that. It's muscle flexing, it's signaling, it's posturing, and nobody really means to actually use nuclear weapons. But the fact is that the nuclear weapons available in the world today are more than enough to destroy the only planet we have. And Russia is currently sitting on the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons of any country in the world. Take a look at how many nuclear weapons there are in the world, who has them, how they can deliver them, and what that impact would be. Debris, devastation, damage. The Ukraine war, an image of the brute power of modern militaries. But nothing comes close to the kind of doom that would become real if the threats being thrown about by the powers at play come to life. With Putin putting the world on nuclear notice by placing his strategic arsenal on war alert, you may be wondering about the strength of the world's nuclear weapons arsenal. You may not know this, but Vladimir Putin currently controls the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Russia, during this crisis, has made not one, not two, but 3 nuclear threats. They've even operationalized and put on high alert their nuclear arsenal. Here's a look at the number of nuclear warheads that each country is known to have just now, because it's all about the numbers. Russia is the country with the largest nuclear arsenal with over 6,200 nuclear warheads at this point of time. The United States has just a few, somewhat fewer warheads, no less powerful, at 5,550. And then there's China, which has 350 nuclear weapons at this time. For comparison, the only other two NATO countries in Europe that have nuclear weapons are, of course, France, which has 290. You've got UK, which has 225. Pakistan has 164. Remember, in the nuclear world, these numbers are enough to destroy the world many times over. India has 156 nuclear weapons. Israel has about 90. North Korea, we think, has between 40 and 50 nuclear weapons. Each of the nuclear powers also have formidable delivery systems to deliver their weapons of mass destruction. Starting with the most secretive and stealthy platforms, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, some of which Russia had sailed into the North Atlantic at the beginning of this invasion of Ukraine. So starting with the Russian nuclear ballistic missile submarines, like we said, is the Bore class of submarine. There are 10 that are supposed to be in service, and their main weapon is the Bulava intercontinental submarine launched ballistic missile. The Bore class is the mainstay. Moving on to the United States, they have a fleet of 14 Ohio class SSBMs, or ballistic missile nuclear powered submarines. The Trident ICBM is the primary nuclear weapon on those submarines. Then you've got China, which has a fleet of 6 Jin class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which have the Julang-2 missile, which is their major primary deterrent weapon. Moving on to France, it has the Triomphant class, a fleet of 4 such submarines, nuclear ballistic missile submarines, where they've got their own weapon system on board those as well. Those also go out on strategic deterrent patrols. Moving on to India, of course, we've got 2 Arihant class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. The Agni series of missiles and their derivatives, the K-15 and the K-4 missiles, are our nuclear-capable submarine-launched missiles on that particular submarine. And finally, the United Kingdom has the Vanguard class, a fleet of 4 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, where the US-built Trident missiles are the primary nuclear weapon on board those submarines. So many, many nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines already in the world. Nuclear powers also have land-launched ballistic missiles designed for intercontinental range nuclear delivery. Russia depends on its arsenal of Topol-M long-range ballistic missiles designed for nuclear strike out to ranges of 11,000 kilometers. The US has Minuteman III ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads out to 13,000 kilometers. China's Dongfeng series of ballistic missiles have large ranges to deliver nuclear warheads, including the Dongfeng 31, capable of nuclear strike out to over 11,000 kilometers. And remember, the land leg of India's own nuclear command has the Agni 5 missile, capable of carrying out a nuclear attack out to 5,500 kilometers or more. All of these long-range missile systems are operational and ready to be deployed at short notice. And in response to Russia's nuclear signaling, are in fact on reciprocal high alert. And apart from land and sea, there's always the aerial option for nuclear bombing, very much like the first and only nuclear attack over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The aerial option exists to this day with nuclear powers. Russia, which has been using the Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile in Ukraine, has been fitting them with non-nuclear warheads. But the missile is capable of nuclear strike as well, and is part of Russia's strategic arsenal, with the missile deployable from MiG-31 fighters as well as Tu-22 bombers. The United States nuclear air delivery platforms include the world's first stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, an enigmatic airplane capable of penetrating highly contested airspace for strategic bombing, and the monster B-52 Stratofortress, an 8-engined behemoth that's seen half a century of nuclear readiness. What we're telling you is that the world has enough nuclear weapons and delivery systems to doom us into non-existence in a flash of a second. Weapons that were developed during the Second World War and then proliferated as a method to keep the post-war peace. While they haven't stopped wars and destruction, they've certainly ensured there hasn't been another nuclear exchange after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But with the world's biggest powers turning up the nuclear heat, it's only natural that the world is on edge. Bureau Report, India Today. One of the biggest military events in the war so far in Ukraine is Ukraine's claimed sinking of the Russian Navy's Black Sea flagship, the huge missile cruiser warship, the Moskva. But even that event has a nuclear angle, and it has actually ended up fueling even more nuclear concerns because Ukraine says this ship was actually carrying 2 nuclear warheads and has asked for an international investigation into whether that's actually true. Take a look.
The threat of Moscow using nukes in the raging Russia-Ukraine war has just got bigger. Experts say there could be 2 nuclear warheads on board the sunken Russian warship Moskva. Experts say the number could be higher as Moskva was capable of carrying nuclear weapons. On the evening of April 13th, a Ukrainian anti-ship Neptune missile hit the pride of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, Moskva, sinking it. Now experts and analysts have warned Moskva could have been carrying 2 nuclear warheads designed to be fitted to its P-1000 carrier killer missiles. Ukraine has called for an urgent probe into the incident. The US says it cannot take the Russian nuke threat lightly.
We obviously take any potential nuclear threat very, very seriously. And when we noted early on in the conflict when Mr. Putin decided to offer some bellicose rhetoric with respect to nuclear capabilities, that we noted at the time that we took that seriously and that we continue to monitor it as best we can. So with respect to any recent rhetoric, we're obviously watching that very closely too.
Moscow had warned NATO that if Sweden and Finland joined the group, it would deploy nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles in a Russian enclave on the Baltic Sea. Moscow possesses approximately 6,000 nuclear warheads as of 2022. The largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world. Observers say it's highly unlikely Moscow could actually start a nuclear war. Given Putin's volatility, his threats can't be taken lightly either. Bureau Report, India Today.
Russia has consistently said that nuclear weapon use is unthinkable and there are no winners in a nuclear war, but has said it will not rule out the use of nuclear weapons in defense. And that means if it is struck first and if its existence comes under threat. What are those red lines? Well, precisely that question has been war-gamed and simulated by a group of scientists at Princeton University, not now, but well before the actual war. And that picture has become terrifyingly familiar with everything that we're seeing. Aggravated by the global escalation against his invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has amplified the nuclear threat, placing the world's biggest nuclear weapons arsenal on operational alert and putting the world on notice. But what would happen if Putin decided to push the nuclear button? What would happen to the world? It's an unthinkable question. But 3 years before the invasion, a group of scientists at Princeton University's program on science and global security created a data-centered simulation with actual targets, actual warheads, and actual plans. It begins very much with what we're seeing already, a battle between Russia and a Ukraine that's armed and trained by NATO and the US. What you're about to see is what would happen if Putin is pushed to the limit. First, Putin fires a tactical nuclear warhead as a warning shot to jolt NATO into the fact that he means nuclear business. Rattled by the crossing of that nuclear threshold, NATO immediately fires back a nuclear tactical missile to destroy the Russian launch site. This triggers a big tactical nuclear war in Europe. Russia dramatically escalates by launching 300 nuclear warheads via aircraft and short-range ballistic missile to hit NATO bases and military units around Europe. NATO returns fire, firing back with 180 nuclear warheads at Russian targets. The crossfire and impact of the nuclear attack engulfs all of Europe, practically destroying the continent, with an initial casualty figure of 2.6 million in just 3 hours. With Europe destroyed, the United States steps in, launching as many as 600 intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads from land and sea at Russia. With the US nuclear missiles still in the air, Russia launches all available intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads at the United States before its own launch sites are destroyed. This phase will create as many as 3.4 million casualties. And in the final phase, with the aim of inhibiting each other's recovery, Russia and NATO target each other's most populous cities and economic centers with 5 to 10 nuclear warheads each, depending on their population.